Welcome to this year's AGP SRDC Virtual Harvest Tour. My name is Chris Schaefer. I'm Senior Vice President of Ag Products for AGP, Ag Processing Inc. I'm in charge of the grain and export side of the company.
And I'm Craig Pedic. I'm the Senior Director of Exports for AGP and in charge of keeping Grays Harbor busy and moving U.S. soy products out of the country. This year, unlike any other year, we started out very worried about how the ASF was going to affect our crush demand and protein demand worldwide, and ended up turning into a COVID event that affected things globally here. So, luckily with AGP here, our facilities were fluid enough and be able to make quick adjustments, not only at our crush plants, but also out at the Port of Grays Harbor. And shipments went off pretty much without a hitch throughout the course of the year.
It started off in January when the first signs of COVID hit, and then we started seeing strong Chinese demand for soybeans, and then the strong pull of Brazilian beans to China during that period, and it lasted from January all the way through August until the Brazilian stocks were depleted. During that time, we had a very ample supply of soybeans in the United States. And as we got into the harvest time, which we just wrapped up, we started to see more demand that was going to China from Brazil started to ship out of the United States. And yields were decent, stronger in some areas, a little weaker in others. One thing apparent across the United States was we had a good harvest. If you talk to most of the managers, they'd say this was the quickest, easiest harvest we've had in a long time that resulted in a lower moisture in both soybeans and corn. We've really seen a rally in soybean boards here in the past 60 to 90 days, and that's been favorable to a company like AGP that relies on to buy beans from our farmers, and it's allowed us to have some good inventories of soybeans, even though we see a lot of beans moving to China. That being said, it's been hard on some of our customers on the meal side as we've taken meal to highs up in the $390 to $400 per ton range. But demand is still very strong as we see the lack of Argentine farmer movement. The Brazilian farmers with a cheap real had heavy movements last year early, and even for next year's 2021 crop, the Argentine farmer held his beans more as a currency hedge against the falling peso. That's made it very tough for the crushers in South America right now, the Argentine crushers, and led to really good meal demand. We see meal demand being very strong here for the next 3 to 4 months, and we'll see what happens with an Argentine and Brazilian bean crop that was a little late planted, but they're catching up now. So they need some rain to get in the fields down there. Likewise, here in the U.S., if you talk to most farmers, they would like to see a heavier snowfall than what we had in the past, because subsoil moistures are a little bit low going into the winter months.
We've seen logistics through the fall harvest and into the winter season that we're approaching, that the railroads, barge lines, etc. have performed very well. Freight rates are still quite low, not as low as they were 6 months ago when we were in the heart of COVID and everything was shut down. They've rebounded since then, but from historical level are still quite low from the P&W to Southeast Asian destinations.
If you look at AGP, our primary export terminal is at the Port of Grays Harbor out in Aberdeen, Washington. And we primarily focus, being a soybean processor, on exporting our soybean meal to Southeast Asia. As we look back at the last year with the strength and the basis in Argentina and the lack of crush down there, our meal exports have been very solid. One thing about the rally and the board that we've had on beans, and it's basically due to a change in our carryout. We went from a very large carryout to a carryout now the USDA is projecting at 190 million bushel. There are people that believe maybe they are a little bit on the low side currently on yield, but probably the bigger driver on this is when Brazil's crop's harvested. Generally, if we see a January Brazil crop, we'll start to see exports dissipate out of the United States as they start to get into their gut slot of harvest. To predict what Chinese demand is going to be, we had the ASF issue that really dropped off their soybean imports. One thing we do know about Chinese demand is without ASF, there has been a trend that their imports have increased. So we've seen this increase start up this past Feb, March, April, May time slot. there's no reason to think that unless we have another case of ASF or a bigger outbreak of COVID than what we're currently going through, that you won't see that trend continue.
Yeah, and not only demand, they also need to replenish stocks and supplies from their corn crop this year that was slightly less. So they've been feeding beans heavily, and not only demand, just replenish their typical inventories that they normally carry as well. I would say for me, this could be a multi-year program where they need to not only buy their needs, also just work on their pipeline and inventories.
The domestic crush is very strong right now. Crush margins in the U.S. are very, very good. That will probably continue until March, when we see what happens in South America and potentially our export shipments of meal start to fall off. From here, demand is good. The driving demand is probably going to be a little lower on ethanol. Ethanol margins are slim right now. Biodiesel isn't affected as much as ethanol to the COVID, since a lot of the biodiesel usage that comes from the soy processing side is more for the semis, and we see still big mileage of semis on the road.
I want to wish all of our friends and valued customers out across the world a very safe and bountiful Christmas season that's soon upon us. I hope you all get to spend some time with your families and be as safe as you possibly can, and hopefully to see you soon.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that too. Happy holidays to everybody. I wish we could have seen you this year. Wish we could have had our Christmas party. There's a lot of things I wish could have happened in 2020 that didn't. As we roll into next year, it's hoping for a little more positive outcome on being able to travel, being able to see old acquaintances that we missed out on seeing this year. Again, we wish you safety, as we move forward through these crazy times, and look forward to seeing you again.